I can understand why people and members are angry. I am angry too. The previous government let people down. Mr. Speaker, the previous government made commitment after commitment without knowing where the money was going to come from. They did this repeatedly, knowingly and deliberately. Today I am calling out the Conservatives' cover-up, and I am taking the first steps to clean up what they have left behind. But the scale of the inheritance we have been left means the decisions we have so far announced will not be enough. This level of overspend is not sustainable. Left unchecked, it is a risk to economic stability. And unlike the party opposite, I will never take risks with our country's economic stability. So it therefore falls to us to take the difficult decisions now to make further in-year savings. Mr. Speaker, the scale of the situation we are dealing with means incredibly tough choices.
Imagine spending months crafting a budget, raising taxes by nearly 27 billion quid to create a massive financial cushion, then watching that cushion deflate faster than a bouncy castle at a kid's party with a puncture. That's essentially what's happening to Rachel Reeves right now, and honestly, it's equal parts tragic and hilarious. The Chancellor stood before Parliament in November, hiked taxes on just about everything that moves, justified it by saying she needed a £22 billion fiscal buffer to protect Britain from economic shocks, and then proceeded to watch that buffer get demolished in a matter of weeks by her own government spending decisions and policy reversals. We're talking about 2/3 of that cushion potentially gone already, barely 6 weeks after the budget. It's not fiscal responsibility, it's fiscal incompetence disguised as prudence. And today we're diving into exactly how Labour managed to turn a £22 billion safety net into what's rapidly becoming financial quicksand. Quick favour, if you're already hooked, hit that subscribe button and smash the bell icon. Over 94% of you haven't subscribed yet. It's absolutely free, takes 1 second, and it genuinely keeps us going. Cheers if you did. Right, let's get into this absolute car crash. So let's wind back the clock to November, when Rachel Reeves delivered her first budget as Chancellor, with all the confidence of someone who thought they'd figured out the secret to managing Britain's finances. She sparked fury, and I mean proper countryside March on Westminster level fury, when she raised taxes by £26.6 billion. That's not a rounding error, that's real money coming out of real people's pockets and businesses' accounts. But Reeves had a justification, or at least she thought she did. She needed to increase the size of her so-called fiscal headroom, which, for those of you who don't spend your evenings reading Treasury documents and weeping, is essentially the buffer between everything the government spends and everything it raises in tax. Think of it like the gap between your income and your outgoings, except with billions of pounds and the entire country's financial credibility at stake. Now, this fiscal headroom isn't just an accounting quirk or a bureaucratic nicety, it's absolutely crucial, because Reeves has set her own rules about how much the government can borrow, and she must keep this buffer in the black if she's going to adhere to those self-imposed constraints. It's like telling everyone you're on a strict diet and then having to actually follow through whilst everyone watches. The problem? Critics immediately pointed out that she'd set the buffer too low in her first budget. So what did she do? She hiked taxes by billions to create a much larger £22 billion fiscal buffer, supposedly to protect her from any international financial shocks or further government spending U-turns. International financial shocks and spending U-turns. Remember those phrases because they're about to become hilariously ironic. Fast forward just 6 weeks, and experts are now warning that this supposedly robust £22 billion buffer has already been slashed by nearly 2/3. 2/3 in 6 weeks. That's not financial management, that's financial evaporation. The main culprits? Well, there's the government's reversal on the family farms tax, the business rates climb down for pubs, and perhaps most significantly, new projections showing that immigration is set to fall dramatically over the coming years, which might sound great politically, but is absolutely catastrophic for the tax base, because immigrants, contrary to what some tabloids suggest, actually contribute substantially to the Treasury. Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride absolutely savaged Reeves over this, and frankly he had plenty of ammunition. Rachel Reeves has lost control of the public finances and the Labour government is too weak to do anything about it, he declared. Lost control, too weak. Those aren't gentle parliamentary jabs, those are full haymakers. Stride continued with a shopping list of Labour's spending decisions since the budget, just 6 weeks ago. We have already had a long list of new spending commitments since the budget, just 6 weeks ago, including a U-turn on inheritance tax and an as-yet unspecified U-turn on Labour's pubs tax, as well as £500 million of new money handed to the EU for rejoining the Erasmus scheme. £500 million for Erasmus alone. That's not pocket change. That's a significant chunk of that precious fiscal buffer disappearing faster than free drinks at a Christmas party. Stride's final line was particularly damning. Just weeks after saying she had made Britain's finances safer, the Chancellor's room to manoeuvre is already at risk. Already at risk, 6 weeks after a budget that was supposed to put Britain on solid fiscal footing. It's like watching someone build a sandcastle and then immediately having the tide come in, except the tide in this case is Labour's own policy decisions and the inevitable consequences of their economic choices. Now let's talk about the immigration projections, because this is where things get really interesting from an economic perspective. According to Bloomberg Economics, net migration is on track to fall by 100,000 a year. Now, depending on your political persuasion, you might think that's great news or terrible news. But from a purely fiscal perspective, from the narrow lens of keeping Rachel Reeves' budget balanced, it's absolutely disastrous. Why? Because that falling migration is projected to cut tax receipts by around £9 billion. £9 billion! That's just shy of a third of the Chancellor's total headroom gone, in one fell swoop, because fewer people coming to Britain means fewer people working, fewer people paying tax, fewer people contributing to the economy. You can't have it both ways. You can't reduce immigration significantly and expect the tax base to remain robust. Economics doesn't care about your political preferences. But wait, there's more, because of course there is. Further concerns are rising about the government's commitment to increasing defence spending, which is thus far completely unaccounted for in the budget. Sir Keir Starmer, in one of his many pledges that sounds great in a speech but requires actual money to implement, has committed to hiking defence spending to 2.5% of GDP in the coming years. Noble aim, particularly given the international situation with Russia, China, and general global instability. There's just one tiny problem. It now turns out that government funding for this pledge is £28 billion shy of what's actually needed. £28 billion short. That's roughly £7 billion every single year that needs to be found from somewhere. And where, pray tell, is that going to come from when the fiscal headroom is already evaporating faster than puddles in a heat wave? Let's not forget the pubs and the farms, though, because these U-turns are particularly emblematic of Labour's current predicament. Reeves committed to watering down business rates on pubs last week after a backbench revolt by her own MPs. Cost £300 million. Now, I'm not saying pubs don't deserve support. British pubs are national treasures, community hubs, the cornerstone of social life for millions. But the point is, this wasn't in the original budget. This is additional spending that comes straight out of that fiscal buffer. Then there's the family farms inheritance tax debacle. Over Christmas, Reeves announced she would raise the threshold at which family farms are forced to start paying inheritance tax, up from £1 million to £2.5 million, at a cost of £130 million. Again, you can argue about whether this was the right policy decision, but fiscally, it's another chunk of that precious buffer gone. Conservative Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride is right when he says this approach is contradictory.
You can't simultaneously claim to care about economic growth and then raise taxes whilst increasing welfare spending. The two things are working against each other. And Kemi Badenoch was not wrong when she branded the entire package a budget for Benefit Street paid for by working people. This is the uncomfortable truth that nobody in Labour particularly wants to discuss. The two-child benefit cap is undoubtedly a cruel policy that affects the most vulnerable children in Britain. Scrapping it is a defensible position, but doing it whilst also breaking manifesto pledges on tax by imposing £30 billion of increases is frankly politically indefensible. You're asking working people to pay more tax whilst the state supports more welfare. That's not a sustainable political message, and it's certainly not something you can sell by just accusing your critics of racism. What makes this entire saga genuinely fascinating is that it reveals the absolute chaos underneath modern British politics. We've got Farage making a policy argument that has uncomfortable undertones. We've got Reeves reading a racial motivation into a citizenship argument. We've got Reform proposing a policy that would help less than 1% of affected families. We've got Labour claiming to care about child poverty whilst simultaneously raising taxes on working people. And Conservatives pretending they have some kind of principled alternative whilst having created the policy in the first place.